Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 267 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renner. The show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. It's where I keep all my resources. It's where you can also find out about my new book, Be Like the Best. The book is 50 interviews with top fitness pros, and after each interview is a Be Like, which is an action step or a challenge that'll help you be like the best. All right, go to ContinueFit.com or BeLikeTheBest.com to check out more about that. All right, on the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner, spoke to Coach Boyle about some foot strengthening ideas from the Tom Michaud presentation that was on BodyByBoyleOnline. They had him as an in-service. Really good stuff coming out of there. We also talked about stretching and something else that tied into it, which was rest periods and should we stretch between rest periods? And we got into this whole thing about dynamic stretching and static stretching from a couple of the forum threads. Good stuff. All right, for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Elias Scarr continues his series on sales. Today we talk about the 3-part strategy session. For the Functional Movement System segment, Brett Jones builds off of the last segment with programming and using the FMS results. For the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment, Adam Doughty talks to Tim Robinson about RPE and training monotony. Don't forget, check out trainheroic.com to start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. For the BodyByBoyleOnline.com, hit the gym of the Strength Coach segment. I have on Kevin Neeld. He's the head performance coach for the Boston Bruins. We're going to talk to him about how he transitioned from assistant to being basically the head guy over at the Bruins for the strength and conditioning department. We're going to talk about his new book, Speed Training for Hockey, about some speed training misconceptions and how maybe it doesn't transfer as much on the ice since ground contact time is longer. So we're going to talk a little bit about transitional speed and what that means. We're also going to talk about his new product that came out with Mike Potenza and James Laval. It's optimizing adaptation and performance. It's 8 hours of content. I was actually there. I was at Mike Boyle's strength and conditioning up in Woburn. And all week up until Friday, November 1st, they're having $50 off, but it's 8 hours of content. This is an incredible, what I really liked about this thing was these guys, they were all playing off of each other. So sometimes you go to a workshop and everything's not, it's all separate. This is 8 hours of one after the other. So it's kind of a really good behind the scenes look. It's when Kevin was working for the San Jose Sharks under Mike, and they have Jim come in and they do a lot of work with Jim. Jim's been on the podcast before, highly recommended episode as well. So that's going to be $50 off. You can check all that out at ContinueFit.com. Lots of things to get to. So let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days. Just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ann. How are you?
All right, hanging in there. Running around, this whole book stuff is it's a whole new ball game for me. So learning as I go.
Hey, it's good though. It seems to be lots of positive feedback, so that's important.
Yeah, it has been. It's been good. So, Coach, let's switch gears away from StrengthCoach.com and go to BodyByBoyleOnline.com. Were you there for the Tom Michaud presentation?
Yes, I was.
Okay, cool. Because you said this a long time ago about plantar fasciitis, and so Tom, he's a what is his title again? Is he
He's a chiropractor, actually.
Chiropractor.
I think technically he is a chiropractor. Yes.
And I know he's done a lot of stuff with gait and the feet, and so he was showing. It was kind of funny in the thing. I didn't see the whole thing, but he was testing the foot strength of a lot of the perineals on with the feet, and he has this little device, and your guys were killing it. He was like, well, nobody ever gets over 20. And I think, I forget who it was. Nico got like 22. One of your other guys got like 27 pounds. They were killing it. And he's really preaching to the choir because, guys, he was, I think he called Nico up because Nico didn't have any shoes on. Right? He was like walking around barefoot and he wanted to see, figured that he would have some good strength. You've been saying that for a long time, but the barefoot, it's why a lot of people, aren't, either wear the, the Vibrams or, work on foot strength. What were there any takeaways from this? Because I know a lot of people, I have a few guys that have dealt with, and myself have dealt with, plantar fasciitis and really trying to work on foot strength and strengthening all those intrinsic muscles of the foot. Did you take away anything today, or what was reaffirmed?
Well, the biggest takeaway really for me was just that maybe we, that using that toe pro might make sense. It's actually on our list for the next staff meeting tomorrow.
Toe pro is what? That's the device.
Sorry, maybe he didn't get that far, but he's got a little thing he's made where it's, you're just kind of pressing down on it with your toes, where it really is to strengthen those foot intrinsic muscles, and he calls it a toe pro.
Okay.
And if Tim, cause Tim was the one who initially, Tim Morrill has been seeing him, and I think Tom and I had corresponded in the past, but I think it's like everything we talk about. Sometimes you're just not ready. It's kind of like, okay, a chiropractor is really into feet. Great. We don't need that. You know what I mean? And then you kind of look at it and think, wow, if we could add even a minute of this a day, and you start looking and thinking, gee, if you could get, a minute of, a couple minutes of rock mat, and a couple minutes of toe pro, and a couple of minutes of toe sits, and that gets into like we were looking at that old stretching thread, if you did some toe sit, heel sit stuff to work on ankle range of motion, big toe range of motion, and would all that be good in the warm up? Barefoot, and my gut feeling is yes. So I'm actually writing notes right now for the staff meeting as I talk to you.
Coach, so the toe pro was that device that was measuring the strength.
No, not the measuring.
Oh, no. Okay.
It's a little foam thing. It looks like, I thought we showed it. Maybe
you probably did. I didn't get to see the whole thing.
Oh, you haven't seen the whole thing. Yeah. So he's got a little, I'm trying to think what I could liken it to, but it's basically a kind of a hard-shelled foam, probably a little harder than an RX pad. And effectively, it's got little steps on it. And kind of depending on where you want to be with your toes. And he's got like an isometric protocol where you're just trying to press down with your toes. And you look at it and think, kind of you might be whatever, like, oh, is that really going to make a difference? But when he kind of starts showing you the anatomy of the foot and realizing that, hey, there are muscles underneath here that are very responsible for this stuff. And we were talking about it when you start looking at people and realizing how dysfunctional their feet really are. When you see people who can't spread their toes, can't pick up their toes, it was kind of, if you went back and looked at a lot of the early stuff when we were talking about Adidas had the 5-finger shoe at the same time Vibram did. And we were all wearing them, playing around with them. And one of the big complaints was that people couldn't get them on. And I used to always say to everybody, if you couldn't get gloves on, you would be in an absolute panic state. Right? If you think, I can't spread my fingers, I keep getting 2 fingers stuck in the same hole of the glove, that would cause an incredible distress. You'd probably check yourself into the hospital and ask for a complete neurological eval. But when suddenly that's your feet, I got whatever. Yeah. So I can't feel my big toes, or my baby toes stuck under my, my 4th toe, and I can't get it off from under there. Who cares? And you kind of like, well, wait a second. It's a part of your body that you don't have control over anymore. That's a big deal.
It's true. Wow. I really didn't think of it like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But nobody does. And all my baseball guys, when I was with the Red Sox, I tried to get them into the 5-toed shoe, and everybody's saying, I can't get them on. They're a pain in the ass. I don't like it. I was kind of like, shouldn't that be the reason you're really thinking about putting them on?
That's amazing.
And it didn't work.
Yeah. And so again, if somebody's using those, they probably don't need the Toe Pro because we're working. If you're going barefoot a lot and working on this stuff, like you said, the mats, the rock mats, you probably don't need the Toe Pro. But this is like Nico and who was the other one that he did?
I think it was Nico and Vinny.
Vinny, yeah, it was Vinny. So Nico and Vinny, I mean, they don't need the Toe Pro. Obviously, it's like they've already got their.
Probably not. Yeah. But I'm thinking more about kind of our average personal training client.
Yeah.
And thinking, wow, I wonder. Just it's another one of those like makes you think, head scratching kind of moments where you're going, There's always a little more. There's always a little more to it than we think.
Yeah. This kind of brings up an interesting point because these are some of the things like the rock mat, some like the barefoot stuff, even foam rolling. Ideally, this is not stuff that would be done in the gym. This is stuff that should be done every day at home. I mean, this is not asking like the resting postures, right? These are things that could just be done so easily. Watching TV, at home, 5-7 minutes. And we're not even asking for a lot, but if we did them consistently, we'd be so much better off. It just goes to show like how important it is to really try to hammer home to people about how much this is a lifestyle and not just, hey, you're coming in here and we're going to try to fix everything, because we got other things that we really want to focus on. So it just kind of reminds me of that.
Well, and it's interesting. Tomorrow we're going to have a staff meeting sort of on dealing with adult clients because we had a couple of issues in the last week that kind of sprung up. But a big part of it is realizing that everybody's not like you.
Yep. Good point.
And that everybody's not motivated. Some people might look and think, you think I'm going to sit in front of my TV and sort of work on my feet or foam roll or work on these postures? I just want to lay on the couch.
Yeah.
And realizing that you might be in, it's funny, I was talking to Cindy about it on the way here. You have so many different, like you have clients, what I was kind of politely referring to today is check the box clients. All they want to do today is check the box. I worked out.
Yeah.
And so it really does come down to what can we get them to do during that time and how beneficial is that going to be? And that's why sometimes when you think about, I guess the big picture, looking at it and saying, what am I going to ask these guys to do? Am I just going to ask them just to lift weights, or am I going to ask them just to condition? Or is there some of this smaller stuff that we can maybe slip into the warm-up that's going to have some decent bang for the buck?
Yep. Yeah, I know. I agree 100%. I mean, I got two guys Wednesday morning and one guy will do his warm-up at home. He lives right down the street. He does his warm-up at home. So he could spend all the time work, like on lifting, on, the power stuff that we do, and just not worry about spending that other 15 minutes on that warm-up. He does it at home, which is great. I love that he does it. He comes right in, he gets right over to the med ball wall and starts doing some plyos and gets going, but the other one is doing the full warm-up, which is fine because he lives, 15 minutes away.
Well, it's funny because I look at that and think we have people like that who I think just say, oh yeah, I don't need, I'm going to get here late. I don't need to warm up. And my problem is I have an inherent lack of trust for those people in terms of, I don't believe it goes back. I always have that quote in my presentations, what people say, what people do, and what they say they do are entirely different. Yeah. And you look at something like that and think, I mean, obviously you don't have a ton of clients and you think, like, I know this guy, I can trust him. But I look at it and think, I always go back to like my little X-Files slide, right? Trust no one.
Well, that's the thing. You're right. I'm not dealing with 20 people at a time right now and saying, oh, geez, this guy, I don't even know. But I know this guy. We're friends now. And I got to actually hold him back. So, I know he's doing it at home. So, because he wants to do more when he's here. I just know his personality. So you're right. 100%. I agree. It's not always something that you're going to, you have to worry about not believing these guys.
Exactly.
Coach, I want to go into this stretching thing because it's an old thread. It was brought up again. Talk about this idea about, because I think it seems like I'm not saying your mindset has changed a little bit on, really you're looking to maintain. I think your second point was about the difference between a painful joint and a non-painful joint might be the width of a slip of a paper. So just go over this, reiterating this stretching thread right now and your thoughts on it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't know if I've changed, but I think I've always said, if you looked at my old presentations, that I don't think we stretch muscles. I think the research on that, and that's like Greg, Mike was talking about the fact Greg Rose said muscles don't get tight. That's probably true. There's probably a neurological reason, whether it's protection or whatever, that muscle is exhibiting a shortened length. But I always go back to my chicken breast in a plastic bag idea. If I gave you a chicken breast in a plastic bag, like in a Ziploc bag, and told you to stretch the chicken breast, you might spend 5 minutes pulling and yanking and realize, man, I mauled the plastic bag, but I haven't changed that chicken breast a whole lot. And I feel like that's kind of muscle and fascia, and that we're probably manipulating something, some other level of connective tissue, not necessarily the actual muscle fibers itself. But the bigger point, and this is what I was saying about slip paper, is that it doesn't matter. If you can cause a really minute, as I said, the width of a piece of paper, if I'm in a situation where something in my shoulder is touching my acromion or the bursa or whatever it is, and something's bumping up against it and it's painful, and I can create a paper's width of space in that joint, that pain's going to go away because those surfaces are no longer contacting. And that's why sometimes people say, oh, these people, they stretch all the time, they never get more flexible. And I think you're probably right. From a perceptual standpoint, someone who's tight never gets loose. You never look and think, oh, wow, this guy came in and he was so stiff, and now he looks like a gymnast. He's doing splits and jumping around. And yet that person may say, I feel so much better because they've managed to get that width of piece of paper. The third piece of the puzzle is, even though people say, well, we're not, we don't get more flexible. It's like, well, what do we lose as we age then? Because we see people, we're losing mobility. And you kind of get into sort of where is this? You can go into, like Mike was saying, I don't want to read Meyer's book, it's too deep. But locked long and locked short aren't deep concepts. Someone who's constantly in a flexed state is going to be locked short. They're going to start to become more collagenous in a shortened state on the front side, and they're going to become more collagenous in a lengthened state on the back side. That's not a hard concept. I agree the book is not an easy read, but there's some things in there that are relatively easy to understand. And everything seems to support the fact that stretching is going to be good for us, whether or not someone is getting more flexible. I always talk about the idea, if you can just get someone to continually return to resting length and not go backwards, that's beneficial. If you took somebody and said, from the time they were 30 to the time they were 60, they stretched, and they never got any worse, I would tell you when they were 60, they were significantly better off than the normal 60-year-old would be. Because that normal 60-year-old wouldn't have been stretching and rolling and doing mobility work and doing all these other things. So I think we want to make it a simple black, white, oh, we don't need it, we do need it. And it's not nearly, it's way more complicated than that. It's hours and hours of discussion in and of itself.
Yeah. The only one thing I kind of have a problem with the whole concept is with the stretching and people don't gain mobility is, are we really doing it to its full? Are we giving it a full, like for example, when you go to FRC, they talk about the research being at least, the stretch has to be at least 2 minutes. Obviously there's a lot. Sue Falsoni's talked about this a lot in terms of the research really doesn't, it goes both ways, that there is no research about time, how long it would take, et cetera. And then others say, no, the research is clear that, you'd have to be doing it for at least 2 minutes. If you look at the LDOA too, they're doing a lot. So people who are using FRC and LDOA are focusing on this, spending a good amount of time on these things. And I wonder if we're really giving it, our full college effort here. Like you had said, even, you had said in it, you thought it was more, you're probably doing more of a dynamic. It's probably more dynamic than really stretching, right? You said we're calling stretching probably falls more into the active mobility category.
At certain points in time, that was more like in between sets, some of the things that we're doing. Okay. But even if we do But you do like, say, a Spider-Man with a T-spine rotation. That's a combination of stretching, active mobility. You start to add in some breathing in there. Now you're talking about bringing in like like a sympathetic nervous system effect. And, you know what I mean? There's all these things that are getting incorporated. And I always come back to the Life cereal commercial. Some stuff it's supposed to be good for you. And you kind of look at it and think, it's some stuff it's supposed to be good for you. We can argue, we can pick the fly shit out of the pepper about, are we doing it long enough? Is it not long enough? Should we be doing, hold, relax? Should we be doing rails? Should we be doing this? But my whole thing is, I don't really care if you say, I'm going to do something, be it Eldoa, be it FRC, be it standard static stretching for 5 or 6 minutes before I work out. I think that's going to be good for you. Mm-hmm. Our experience has shown us that that's going to be good for you. And as you said, is it enough? Maybe not. Is it an adequate, I look at it and think it seems to be enough because we're getting people to feel better. And ultimately, I look at all of these things as part of the recipe that gets somebody to feel better in terms of rolling, breathing, stretching, that active mobility work, which is really in some cases stretching, right? It's basically some of our active mobility work. Someone would look at it, oh, that's PNF. Okay, whatever. Leg lower, the way we do leg lowers, it's probably a PNF stretch. Yeah. But I just get into kind of all right, we can have a really long intellectual conversation about this, but if it's not changing what we're doing from a workout perspective, I'm not all that interested in the conversation until somebody like the Eldoa stuff interests me, but it's really weird. You can't, it's sort of like it's in like the super secret category right now in terms of there's not a lot of stuff written about it. And no one's kind of gone out and made it simple, like, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. Because obviously they want you to take the course, which I think that's everybody's kind of goal with a lot of this stuff. And even the FRC stuff, people will take a 2-day course and then come back and totally screw it up. We were talking about that in one of the other threads. That's one of my complaints about the FRC thing. And when I sat down, I had a couple of beers with Dr. Speener and Dewey, and they agreed. They said, yeah, that it's hard because people take the course and then they walk away and you're kind of like, damn, in 2 days they did not grasp what we wanted them to, because it's like this thing about how big a circle can I make? And what I saw at MBSC, the people who took the course got really good at teaching compensation instead of teaching really, controlled articular range of motion, which is what they're supposed to be doing. It was actually uncontrolled biarticular stuff that they were ending up doing because people thought, oh, the bigger circle I can make with my arm, the better it is. And it's like, no, that's not the goal at all. Yeah. The goal was to be able to move your glenohumeral joint, not your scapulothoracic joint. Yeah. Well, or if we're trying to do scapulothoracic, then that's what we want to do. So I think that's part of the problem, is that we still, I don't know if we're there yet in general with all this stuff. And I think somebody will get better at synthesizing all of this and saying, hey, here's exactly what I need you to do before the workout. Yeah.
Well, so, I think FRC had this, same problem as FMS in the beginning, right? Because they're still relatively new in this game, 5 or 6 years in with these, like, really going hard on the certifications. And there's kind of a lot of information in that 2 days, but you see the people that stick it out over time, then it clicks and they get really good at it, and they're not teaching compensation. But I agree. That was one of the complaints that I had to Dewey and Andreo as well, was that, wow, that was way too much information for 2 days. Like, you just need to go over the cars for like 2 days and then let me get used to that and then get level 2. But yeah, I mean, that's a hard thing to do in this day and age. We want all these certifications, we want all this information and blah, blah, blah. But we have the tools now. You guys do it right at CSFC with, hey, you got to learn all this shit first, because you're going to come in, we're going to quiz you, and then we're going over this today, and you're going to show practically that you've been doing it. That's the way to go. Give them the information first. We have the ability to do it. Come on, you can do it.
Well, that's why I feel like, and I'm prejudiced, but that's why I feel like our cert is so good, because we're not going to spend, it's kind of like however many hours you need to spend to feel comfortable coming to the practical is however many hours you need to spend coming to the practical. At the practical, we're going to show you what we want you to do. We're going to have you practice it. And then we're going to have you kind of show us back that you can in fact do it, because we've seen way too many times people doing exactly what we talked about, going, listening, seeing, and then realizing, wow, they didn't get it. They're not understanding what we wanted them to understand. And so that's why in some ways I thought people might perceive the CFSC to be too simple. And it ended up being just the opposite. People love it.
Yeah.
And I think they probably love it because it is relatively simplistic and it does drill down on pretty simple stuff for the course of the whole day. And it's just sort of, okay, here's the things that we're going to do. We're going to practice them. And then we're going to hopefully get you to be able to come back. Because the interesting thing that I like about the certification thing that I didn't think I would like before is that people worry about tests. It's sort of human nature.
Sure.
And I can remember one of the guys that I talked to at the cert, he said, I feel great. He said, because I've been doing your program now for 2 months getting ready for this. And I thought, wow, I never thought that would be part of the picture, was that this guy would go back and his way of practicing obviously was to do everything.
Yeah. I can tell you, as somebody who's taken a lot of certifications, et cetera, is part of the reason why people love it is because Monday, they truly can use it because of that practice. The frustrating part about a lot of these things are you go and then you come home and you're like, shit, I got to practice this now, right? So your practice was beforehand. Now everybody else is learning new concepts on that weekend where you're really just reinforcing them at CSFC, and you're still learning. And I think this is what SFG does too, really well, strong first. And because you've practiced, you had to prepare for the test. Now you learned some new stuff and you tweaked it. Monday, you go in, you're like, that's right, I'm CSFC, I'm SFG, I can do this, and I'm starting this shit right away. And that's the beauty of it, and I think that's why people love it. So I will leave you on that note, Coach. We went overtime here, so I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next time. All right, right now at Perform Better, free online shipping, no minimum order. Free online shipping. You have to do it online, obviously, but there's no minimum order. Good stuff from Perform Better on that one. Special financing there. No interest 36 months. No down payment. No payments for the first 6 months. That's ridiculous. If you want to open a gym, this is the way to go. You can check it out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. All right, now it's time for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. I'm here with the membership director for Results Fitness. He's also the sales and communication coach for Results Fitness University, Elias Scarr. Elias, thanks for coming back on.
Yeah, happy to be here, man.
All right. We talked about kind of sales over the phone and that initial phone call that people are going to be inquiring about the gym. Then we talked about where to do this whole process, whether we should have a dedicated office or we can do it right out on the floor, which is going to be 10 times easier for 90% of the gyms out there. And now, I want you to give us an overview of your strategy session. You have 3 parts to it. Tell us about the 3 parts.
So the 3 primary parts of the strategy session are, number one is the intake, that introduction where you meet somebody, you bring them in, we have a seat down at the strategy session table, and we fill out the form. Now, every gym has forms like general information, medical history, they ask what your goals are and things like that. But what most do is they tend to have that person fill it out. Here, go fill this out, and then when you're done, we'll talk. We actually like to sit down and fill that out with them. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is the actual assessment. So we go through functional movement screen. We talk about what their training history is, what it is, kind of what have they done before and where are they now? How do they move and how does everything go now? And then the last piece is the tour. And we give them a tour of the gym based on all the information we've had beforehand. And then it leads right to the close, which is, I promise, the easiest part.
There you go. Now, the thing about this order or this idea, like you said, with the tour, um, the sales process, the close should take care of itself. And you called it, you said in our episode of Strength Coach TV that we're kind of stacking. Talk to us about that and why the close should be so easy.
Yeah, absolutely. So closing really is people put so much emphasis on the close. How do I close? How do I close? It's simple. You just ask them, are you ready to sign up? And which one do you want to sign up for? That's literally all the close is, because so much of what we're doing ahead of time is stacking value, but we don't know how to stack that value until we know what's valuable to that person, right? So if we sit down and we take the time to get to know them. So that first part where we get the intake, we get their general information, some medical history. We start to talk about their stress levels, what their day is like, what kind of work did they do? And then we start to get into what their goals are, what it is they want to accomplish. By doing this together and starting asking questions, we start simple questions like, take any medication right now? Do you have any major dietary limits we should know about? Simple, easy to answer questions, but getting them into the habit of answering those questions allows them to get more comfortable in conversation. As we get more comfortable in conversation, we get to ask deeper questions like, what are you looking for in a gym? Like, for example, no one comes to the gym to build muscle and burn fat. What they want is what building muscle and burning fat does for them. And that's what I'm trying to get to. What is this? What's the emotional anchor, the emotional attachment here? So by starting with that and then getting into the assessment, like we use the functional movement screen, and then getting into that program, I can now talk to them specifically about what they want. If I have someone that's here for fat loss, we're not going to talk about a 600-pound deadlift. If I've got someone that's here for a 600-pound deadlift, we're not going to talk about fat loss. So the better I understand what it is that they see as valuable, the easier it is for me to converse specifically on that, right in through the assessment, and then from the assessment through the tour. So now as we get into the tour, that allows me to talk about, this is how this is going to affect your fat loss. And when it affects your fat loss that way, how is this going to feel? How is this going to help you? How's this going to affect your day-to-day life? So you're literally closing from the beginning. Closing has everything to do with asking the right questions at the right time in order to get them to make a purchase, because we know how valuable that purchase is going to be for them.
Absolutely. Now, talk to me really quick about this idea. Like, let's continue on the close idea. So many people have 74 options. Talk to us about how you kind of make sure that you're not, I know you know the direction that they want to go, and you're going to offer some stuff, but do you guys have, like I said, there's so many options with people. What do you present to them at that point for the close? Like, are you ready to sign up? But what are you telling, like, are you suggesting a certain membership? Go over that.
Yeah, great question. So the thing to keep in mind here is that we are the professionals. I know what's best for you. I know, knowing what you want and knowing what you want to accomplish, here's how we get that thing. When you sit down with your doctor at the end of like, here, hey, I'm sick. He doesn't say, all right, do we want, what kind of, you got 15 different medications. Which one do you want? Like, it doesn't, he's the professional. Yeah. He decides what that person needs, right? So number one, we keep it simple and we make a recommendation. At Results Fitness, we really have two options. And there's a couple of variables they can choose within those options, but they got to pick one of those paths first. It's either group training, which, large group training, or semi-private training. That's really your options. So when we do that, you have to keep this in mind. We're asking for an A or B, this one or that one. Would you like this one or that one? Where it sort of takes no off the table, although no is that third answer, right? But it kind of takes it off the table. Do you want this one or this one? Isn't a yes or no question. Second, when you have a million options and a ton of things to choose from and a whole bunch of upgrades and all that to choose from, people can get paralyzed by indecision, right? One of the most popular restaurant chains in Southern California is In-N-Out. You basically get fries, a burger, a cheeseburger, and a double-double. That's it. That's all you can order.
Yeah.
And the lines are stacked, and no one waits to make a decision. They know exactly what they want by the time they get there because it's easy to make a decision. Overwhelming with options makes it difficult to make a decision. And when it's difficult to make a decision, that's the same as no.
So if you have options, like as an owner, somebody's thinking that, but I have so many options, you would just basically try to keep breaking it down to the A and B. So for example, you want semi-private or group? Yes, I do. Do you want, now, so I want semi-private. So now you can say, okay, so great. Semi-private's awesome. I think that you made the right choice. would you like to do 2 times or 3 times a week? Is that what you're basically keep doing? A, B, A, B, A, B.
Absolutely right. If you have a whole bunch of things that you offer at your gym, number one, make a recommendation. I recommend semi-private training twice a week, and then our shred class 2 times a week. And I want to get you into the stretch class 1 time a week. And then we're going to start some nutrition protocol based on everything you've told me. Make that recommendation first and ask them, how does that sound? And they will tell you, that sounds great. Boom, signed up. Or they'll tell you, actually, I can only do this, or I was thinking a little more along the lines of that, and the close becomes a conversation. You say, great, well, I can give you this, this, and this. Does that sound like what you're looking for? So you're continually going down that recommendation line. Here's the best recommendation based on what we've talked about, what your schedule's like, what your budget's like.
Very cool. All right, awesome. Next session, we're going to go a little deeper into some of the components of the strategy session. So, Elias, thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely, man.
All right. Everybody remember, go to resultsfitnessuniversity.com for more information on their masterminds and coaching.
Hello, Brett Jones again with the Functional Movement Systems segment of the Strength Coach podcast. Following up, want to build off of the last segment where we were talking about awareness and feedback loops. And I want to tie this into programming with using the FMS results. Because while we are trying to assist in improving a pattern that needs to change, we're also programming using that information. And that doesn't mean we're not training. It means we're going to target the areas that we can train in effectively and build a program, not challenging the things we're in the process of trying to change or that we shouldn't be challenging, and targeting those areas where we can push and accomplish conditioning and accomplish the work. Our clients, our people come to us to accomplish the results. And so while we're using the awareness and the feedback loops in efficiently creating change in those movement patterns, and a lot of these programming conversations where we're saying, this is a red light, don't go after this pattern right now, those are very temporary conversations. We're not saying never do this. We're saying, hey, don't do this for right now. Because if we look at principle number 2, of course, we know principle number 1, move well, move often. Move well enough to be able to adapt to the stress you're being placed under in a positive fashion. If you've just shown me that you can't access a movement pattern, why would I assume that you're going to adapt in a positive fashion if I start training that movement pattern? So that brings us into principle number 2, where we protect before we correct. And protect simply means, what do I need to ask you to not do for right now? Now, we could break that into lifestyle versus training environment, where, hey, if I find out you're sleeping 4 hours a night, working 2 jobs, and your diet's not dialed in, I'm actually not too convinced that you have a movement problem. I think I need to look deeper into the lifestyle end of things. But once I start looking at your programming, I start looking at the results of your screen. And so we take somebody that has a 1 on deep squat, a 1 on leg raise, and a 1 on trunk stability push-up. I'm just pulling numbers out of my head here. Then I know that squatting, symmetrical deadlifting, and overhead and activities and those things that call for me to resist extension are going to come off the table. We had a great thread on this on the forum, strengthcoach.com, and there were some really great responses in there. And I just want to highlight this a little bit, because knowing that there's a deep squat, 1, I'm going to go check ankles. I'm going to use the ankle clearing from the motor control screen, and I'm going to make sure that the ankles aren't part of that deep squat issue. If they are, and I'd also double check the ankles anyway, because we got a leg raise problem. So feet are part of your legs, and probably a good thing to double check when we're looking at a leg raise. So I'm going to check ankles to make sure that I'm not having an ankle issue within the deep squat or something that's going to continue to influence that leg raise. By taking those ankles off the table, improving them if needed, we can really create some efficient change for the person that we're working with. So squats are off the table. That doesn't mean that we might eventually use some sort of assisted squat, but for the moment, squats are off the table. Symmetrical deadlifts are off the table. Knowing that they're going to become part of the strategy that corrects and assists that leg raise in improving. So I'm getting to deadlifting. I might just have a couple of stops before that. And my awareness and my feedback are going to tell me if I'm doing the right things. So the priority here is the leg raise. But knowing that we have a 1 on trunk stability push-up, I'm going to try some core engagement techniques in my leg raise strategy and see if that lack of lumbopelvic control isn't one of the primary reasons for that leg raise issue. So while the shoulders are clear from a movement perspective, and technically, if we just looked at the shoulder mobility score, we'd be saying, oh, we can go overhead. But when we look at trunk stability push-up, and we know we need to take those activities that call for you to resist extension off of the table for the moment, those overhead activities that were clear, because shoulder was clear, are now not clear. So the stoplight system, the red, yellow, green, obviously we all know what that means from a driving perspective. Red means stop, yellow means caution, and green means go. We're going to red light those things. And so as you get multiple red lights, other activities that are green and clear in another pattern are not clear because they're actually challenged by another pattern that we're still trying to work on. So when we look at programming using the FMS results, we're looking at saying, hey, let's just take a couple things off the table, reduce the stress on the system, quit challenging those patterns that we're trying to create change in, and allow time for the change to occur. Now, I'm talking 3 to 5 sessions. I'm talking a couple of weeks. I'm not talking 3 months, 5 months, 6 months. I'm talking about quickly and efficiently changing movement. So if you screen somebody once, you take things off the table and never add them back in, you're not applying the system to the best of its abilities. What we want to do is have that awareness and feedback in place so that we're creating that efficient change. And that really is one of the keys. So when we're programming by FMS results, we're having what should be a temporary conversation. Hey, let's just stop doing that for right now. Hey, let's take a little deeper look at all of the patterns and realize that something that's clear on one level is not clear on another, because for the shoulder mobility and trunk stability example, shoulders are clear. Technically, overhead work would be good. Nope, because that trunk stability push-up, we're going to have to take a deeper look and slice that a little thinner and make some different decisions. But I've also got that piece of the puzzle that, hey, we've got a lumbopelvic control issue and core control issue and a leg raise issue. Let's see if juicing the motor control a little bit helps me improve that leg raise efficiently. Changing a leg raise is not about stretching hamstrings. It's about looking at the entire pattern. The deep squat, if the ankles are clear, we're just going to leave the squat alone for the moment. We're going to create change within the leg raise and trunk stability push-up. Because if you do a good job in that leg raise correction, if some core engagement techniques were effective with that leg raise, we might see a change in the trunk stability push-up without ever having to work on it. Don't assume. Use your awareness and feedback loops. That's what's going to make you look really good when you go back and retest. Trunk stability push-up improved. You didn't even have to work on it. And then you're going to go check the deep squat. Maybe the deep squat is now a 2, and you never had to do any, quote, correctives on it. You don't have to fix everything. Just have to fix the right thing. Now, in that example, deep squat's off the table, but split stance isn't. Single leg activities aren't. So I could be talked into step-ups, rear foot elevated split squats, other activities to train the legs. While overhead activities might be off the table at the moment because of the trunk stability push-up, shoulder mobility says horizontal pushing and pulling is going to go just fine. We're not fighting a rotary stability issue. So again, those split stance and some of the single leg activities are going to be okay. So there's actually, could you program somebody off of that? If I said, do split stance and some single leg activities, horizontal pushing and pulling, and then your conditioning work and everything like that. Knowing that running's off the table for just a moment, you can program off of that, and you can actually create a really nice program using that information. It allows you to individually tailor the program to the movement patterns we need to be targeting right now. The corrections, those patterns we're trying to assist in improving, those can be layered into that session. Part of the movement prep maybe is active recovery between sets. Understanding that I firmly believe that rest is one of the most abused training variables we have, and should probably be resting longer between your sets than you think. Gives you time to do all of this. So just wanted to pull this out. Again, it's a great thread on strengthcoach.com. There's some good information there. Hopefully this look at this example, I don't want to say case study, but this example that we were talking about, keep in mind those awareness and feedback loops. That's what's going to help you create that efficient change. If the ankles had been an issue, you would address the ankles immediately. You're not going to wait till you're done with the leg raise. Ankles can be added to any other strategy that we're working on. Hopefully, just a little peek in using the FMS system from a programming standpoint. Go to functionalmovementsystems.com for more information, and we look forward to the next time we can talk to you on strengthcoach.com.
Hey, this is Adam.
This is Tim.
Welcome to the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Love data, Adam. Love
so
it.
Today, Tim, let's talk about ponies.
Oh, this was an interesting change in direction. What about ponies, Adam?
Well, they're beautiful, obviously. Tim doesn't like betting or ponies because he's a Yankees fan. So
enough of this. Into the podcast, Adam.
Okay, so ponies, horses. Okay, so back in the day, 25 years ago, there was a paper where they did a training study on horses, right?
Okay.
And basically what it showed was if you took horses and trained them on like an easy, hard, that kind of pattern, and you increased the difficulty of the hard day to get, to overload them, they got better. Oh. But if instead you increase the difficulty of the easy day, basically making everything like the same, they got worse.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so this was kind of like I think the underpinnings of like what we now know as training monotony. And we could go into that. It could be a whole hour thing about standard deviations and all that, which I would love, but you would not. So
more to come.
Let's pull that back and let's actually bring it back to RPE, which is something that you can more simply kind of understand and use, right?
Yes.
And so we do collect RPE and Train Heroic at the end of the session along with time. And one question we get from folks is like, hey, why is 3 moderate? Like, why is it centered on 3?
Yeah, so just for the visual learners out there, there's a scale of 1 to 10.
0 to 10.
0 to 10, excuse me. And you can slide the slider, okay? And, where my little brain goes is that, well, if we want moderate intensity, I'm going to put it at a 5, Adam, because that's directly between 0 and 10. Not the case, though. That's not the case. And there's a really good reason or method to that madness. And we didn't just make this up, right? It's not something we just pulled out of our hat and said, 5's hard now, not moderate.
No. So that scale, the one we use is the Cr10 scale. It comes out of like some papers by I think Foster back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, where he did a lot of work on quantifying training stress by subjective measures like RPE.
Sure.
So, and I can tell you, we have data on this. We used to have a scale in there actually that was not labeled. Right?
Yes.
It was just a 1 through 10.
Oh boy.
And I can tell you, like, I can look at the numbers and like basically the average was like 7.5, and the bulk of entries were like 6, 7, and 8.
Yeah,
like
so
there wasn't a lot of anything else.
If you create a bar graph, which you did, most of the entries were 6, 7, and 8. Very few on the lower end of that, like distribution or whatever you want to call it. When we changed it though, it really evened itself out.
Yeah, we have like a broader distribution. We have more values, of 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
And so again, that's not necessarily the goal, so to speak, but it does indicate that people are able to distinguish between efforts a little better. Right.
So why is 3 hard then?
Well, I mean, think about it this way. 3's not hard, 3's moderate.
Moderate,
But I'm thinking about it this way, like psychologically, if middle's 5 and training's always kind of hard, then you're apt to log things of 6, 7, 8, but not necessarily 9 or 10, because that's basically saying like, oh, that was super hard, right?
Yeah.
And so you have only a few points to really use on a regular basis. But now if I have more room at the top of the scale for things like, from between 3 and 10, I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 now. I've got a couple more slots to fit things in. I get a little broader array of entries, right?
That makes
Plus,
sense.
the verbal anchors make you not feel so bad about entering somebody to 3, right?
Got it.
Because it's like, okay, yeah, it was moderate, sure. Accurate.
So say I'm kind of bookended. I'm limited by the amount of time I have, so I can't really vary that. And these are just set periods of times when I can train my people. What would you vary? Do you have an example of that, Adam? How do you
It's almost like you read my mind.
So, we do this every week.
Yeah. So I have an athlete right now who's kind of a big dumb donkey. He's a very fit, very able guy, but he even admits that he just wants to do something hard basically all the time. And but he's older. He's got kids. He trains like 4 a.m. He's a real person who's got a real life, and he just wants to go hard. Well, so I set up this program for him, which has kind of got this like daily undulating thing going on where like Monday and Friday are harder and more hypertrophy, more volume rather, or intensity focused. And the middle day is a little bit more like speed, technique, power, far from failure, that kind of stuff.
Got it.
And so I can reflect on his ratings now if I pull up his training summary, and I can see that in fact that pattern has played out in real life. So he's got 5, 6, the occasional 7 on Monday, Friday, and then I see 2s and 3s on that more power-oriented day. So that's actually been executed the way I planned it.
Got it.
And so that just feedback to me and saying like, yeah, I actually I plan to vary the stress. Like basically he's training like 60 to 75 minutes a day.
Yeah.
So to change the amount of stress that he's getting,
here we go.
It's basically the time times intensity. Right? That's a simple way of doing this. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm training on a constrained schedule, which a lot of people are out there, if I'm training most days of the week for an hour, that says that really I ought to be varying the difficulty of those sessions. Right?
You got it.
And so we can go back to monotony and all this, but really that's the heart of it, is saying like, okay, so if my time is constrained, I have to kind of change the intensity a little bit to avoid everything being basically hard all the time or the same difficulty all the time.
And that's the beautiful thing about RPE. It's simple, and it's a really easy way for you to make sure that what you're programming and coaching is having that desired result.
That's going to do it for us today. Go to trainhook.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives here, kind of like Tim, be sure to tell them the Strength Coach Podcast sent you for 10% off a year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
All right, now it's time for the BodyByBoyleOnline.com. Hit the gym with the Strength Coach segment. Become an insider to Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning with staff meetings, in-services, and complete access to the MBSC programs. We just posted a bunch of staff meetings. Mike starts them up in September every year, and he's already got a couple of in-services, so you can check that out at BodyByBoyleOnline.com. Today, I got my friend Kevin Neeld on. Kevin is the head performance coach for the Boston Bruins. He oversees all the aspects of designing and implementing the team's performance training program, and he helps monitor the players' performance, workload, and recovery. Prior to Boston, he spent 2 years as an assistant coach and conditioning coach and he also had to get lunch, usually the Italian combos and meatball sandwiches for Mike Potenza and the San Jose Sharks. Before that, he was director of performance at the Endeavor Sports Performance in Philly, and he was a strength and conditioning coach with USA Women's Olympic Hockey Team. So, Mike, Kev, thanks for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I just did the Freudian slip. I called you Mike because I wanted to do the Mike Potenza weather report. Because Mike, are you in Boston right now? Wait, you're in Boston, right?
I am, yeah.
Okay, just you never know. Well, what's the weather like there?
You know what? It's actually a beautiful day outside. I think it's kind of the typical New England fall day. It's a little crisp breeze outside, but it's the sun's out, so can't complain. I think the majority of the time I spent out in San Jose, I felt like it was either raining or half the state was on fire. So, as pleasant as Potenza makes the weather seem out there, I think I'm happy to be back on the East Coast.
There you go, man. Now you don't have to go running for those the supersada mozzarella for Mike every other day. So, Kev, I want to start out. Last time I saw you in person was for the Optimizing Adaptation and Performance workshop you did at Mike Boyle's, and we got to spend some time together. But I'm pretty sure you were only like 2 days away from getting the Bruins job. So you spent 2 years as an assistant with the Sharks. Obviously, you were director of performance at Endeavor for a long time. Talk to me about how that transition went. Was it overwhelming? What were some of the challenges that you had to face going into the Bruins as kind of the head honcho?
Well, I think when I made the transition from Endeavor to the Sharks, there was a little bit of a transition just because the environment's so different. You go from working in the private sector where the only thing that you really have to worry about is designing and implementing training programs, and the people that you're working with are paying for your expertise and for your coaching. So it provides a really great environment to focus on maximizing the quality of the training program design and delivery. When you get into the team setting, the list of competing demands changes drastically. And, I think in San Jose, we had a great training culture, but there's a little bit of the training is a box to check on a long list of other things that are required of the players. So, you're stepping into a different environment. Obviously you have to learn. Every organization's different. Every staff is different. So getting to learn the personalities and the culture of the group, and the style that the coaches want the players to play, which influences the training program. All of those things were a bit of a transition. And anytime I was there for 2 years, and both years were significantly different. A couple new players in the mix, couple new coaches. Just the different schedule. It just I don't think that any 2 years in that setting are the same. So, I think working with Potenza was an unbelievable experience. He was not, Mike was the director and I was the assistant there, but I never felt that I was being limited in my ability to influence our program in any way. I think Mike was really supportive of some of the ideas that I had, and was a really good mentor and sounding board for trying to funnel some of the questions that I had and some of the ideas that I had to make them the most effective within that setting. So I felt really comfortable in transitioning into the head role in Boston because I didn't feel like there was any part of that role that I hadn't had an opportunity to be exposed to in San Jose. I think the big difference is in one situation, if you have an idea or if you want to make a change, then it's kind of a collaborative effort between Mike and I to say, is this going to work? Do we like the way that this fits within our schedule? And is this the best way to implement this? And in Boston now, it's kind of up to me to, obviously we still collaborate within the staff, but the final say falls on my shoulders, I guess, instead of Mike. So that part's a little different, and like I had alluded to, every organization's different. Our roster here is obviously quite a bit different than it was in San Jose. So a big part of getting my feet on the ground was really just trying to have a better understanding of what has been really successful for these players in the past. What areas could I maybe make improvements on? What things were not being addressed that was something that I could bring to the table, and then just really getting a sense of what the training culture is there, and the work ethic, and how the scheduling fits with practices, how coaches run practices, and that sort of thing. So you kind of hit the ground running and just take it one day at a time and take it all in stride. But those are kind of the big transition points.
Very cool. Now, a lot of people, it doesn't have to be, they're going to a professional sports team and they're going to be, head performance coach, but they're going to get jobs in high schools and colleges that now they are responsible. They might have a staff of even one or two. Let's just say, like, I'm this year's Stanley Cup champion New York Islanders call me and they want me to work for them. What advice are you going to tell me getting into that new role, and with that as the head performance coach? What would you tell somebody who's going to about to be the in charge of the performance team?
I think I would default back to something I've heard Mike Boyle say a lot, which is you have 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and to use them appropriately in that ratio. And I think it's really a mistake to walk into an organization that will be, has been there before you were a part of it and will be there after you're a part of it, and to assume that you're going to mold everything to fit your system and vision perfectly without any consideration to their culture. So, I think the best advice is to stick to your big rocks philosophically, but ask a lot of questions and be open-minded about how you're planning to implement things, because, it's a lot of things. I don't know that there's a perfect program that is going to work in every situation. There's different logistical constraints in every environment. And I think the more adaptable you can be to have a really clear vision of what your intent for an outcome is, but then be a little bit flexible in the path of how you get there is really going to benefit people that are transitioning into new settings.
Love it. Great advice. Kev, let's talk about your book. Your book came out in May, Speed Training for Hockey, 12 Weeks to Game-Changing Speed. And I want to talk about some of the things. By the way, we'll have a link to that on the show notes. I want to talk about some speed training misconceptions. And right now, I want to start out with that. You were talking about a lot of people are still, and it's funny because I had a parent text me. I've been working with a couple of hockey players. It's like obviously, you've been to 5-Iron Fitness. I sold that, but I still train a little bit, and I got some hockey players. Anybody who listens to the show knows that. And I love working with the guys. And one of the dads was like, I asked me about one of his skating coaches, like, he needs quicker feet. I was like, oh, brother. We're still getting that, and you talk about this in the book, and I know in general, but just a reminder, talk to us about this idea about quick feet.
Yeah, I think anybody that's been around sports for a long time has seen somebody, whether it's on the field or on the ice, that looks like their feet are moving really quick, but they don't get from point A to point B quickly. They don't get there fast. And, I think the easiest visual for people is if you watch somebody do a ladder drill and you only look at their feet, you might think, like, man, those feet are turning over quick. This person's really fast. But if you look at their chest, they're not actually going anywhere. It's just their feet that are kind of bouncing in and out or going through whatever the pattern is really quickly, but their body isn't moving fast. In contrast, fast runners and fast skaters are relocating fast. And I think that's the biggest misconception. And some of it's just terminology. I think some people say, I want quicker feet. And really what they're saying is, I want to be less slow. But the problem is that when people say, I want quicker feet, then, their search results on Google are going to bring up all these insane things that aren't going to have any transfer to actually being faster, especially within the sport of hockey that has some pretty significant differences to land-based sports.
Absolutely. Kev, let's go. One misconception you said was that just doing more linear sprints and top speed end work will make you faster. Coach Boyle is really he swears by it. We've talked about it a lot on this show, where he's doing the flying 10s and he's seeing great results. But it kind of sounds like it might not be the only thing you really need to do. It's really the only thing, Coach, he's timing them, but talk to us about what you feel like we also need to do, like that, and this idea that, we need to do more than just linear sprints.
Sure. If you watch a hockey game, the players aren't skating in a straight line for very long. So, it's as simple as that there's a lot of curvilinear and transitional mechanics that are extremely important to the game. From a training standpoint, I think you can kind of look at speed within two really broad buckets. And the first is, do they have the engine to produce speed? And then the second is, do they have the patterns and the techniques to express that engine within the context that's most relevant for the sport? So, first off, I think the idea of timing sprints is extremely important. I've mentioned in the past how important I think assessments are in general, and providing some sort of live feedback gives the athletes something to compete against. And I think it increases the effort level and the intent of what they're doing. So, timing linear sprints or, any sort of quote unquote agility drill or transitional exercise, I think the timing element is really powerful. The transitional side of things, there's a couple different ways that you could view it. And, one is that if the training program focus is only to develop the engine, I think you can make the argument that the transitional mechanics side of things would obviously have the best transfer to the game if it was done on the ice and in skates and was really specific that way. The problem with that is that ice time is extremely expensive and you don't always have the opportunity to book ice to work on those specific elements. And, for the majority of the people listening, I don't think most people probably feel comfortable hopping on the ice and breaking down somebody's transitional mechanics. So integrating some of that work in an off-ice setting from the athlete standpoint gives them an opportunity to learn the body control and positioning that in a more controlled off-ice scenario that could be really relevant and transfer to their on-ice mechanics. And from a coaching standpoint, it gives the training professional an opportunity to see some of these default movement characteristics of the player and to give them some of the tools that they need to, hopefully transfer some of those abilities to the ice as well.
Yeah. And you said ground contact times are much longer in skating than they are in running. And this leads to a larger impulse, which is the cumulative amount of force produced over the duration of a stride. But what does that really mean for me? Like, does that mean I should do longer duration, contact time training, or what does that mean for me?
So if you look at running from accelerating from a standstill, if you think of a 40-yard dash, for example, the first few strides that the person takes have really different characteristics from top end speed and upright running. And, the first 4 strides, let's say, have ground contact times that are kind of in that 0.15 to 0.25 second range. There's a forward lean. There's a more piston-like kind of pushing pattern from the lower extremity. And then as they transition into faster speeds, they become more upright. There's a greater emphasis on vertical stiffness of the leg and that stretch shortening cycle and being able to transfer force that way. The ground contact times decrease substantially. I think at top speed, it's closer to 0.08 or 0.1 seconds. So in contrast, skating requires that forward lean pretty much consistently throughout any type of stride, whether you're skating forwards, backwards, crossovers. It really doesn't matter. The body position characteristics are similar in a lot of respects. The contact time with the skate in the ice is around a third of a second. So essentially 3 times longer, 3 to 4 times longer than top end speed, and about double, 1.5 times that of initial acceleration. So, there's a couple different ways to interpret that. First is that if you're looking at sprints to maximize transfer to skating, then focusing on the early acceleration phase of sprinting is going to be much more specific to the demands of skating. And by that, I mean, the first 10 to 15 yards are going to have the body positions and lower extremity mechanics that are more similar to skating, opposed to when you get outside of that 15-yard mark. Conveniently, hockey players aren't traditionally the best runners either. So when you get into some of those longer distances and more upright running, then you have a little bit more concern about, high quad and hamstring things flaring up. And within 15 yards, I don't know, I think in 10 years, I don't know that I've ever seen a single incident. So safer and more direct transfer to those positions. But, the other side of that, and is that you can kind of take that same thought process and apply it to plyometrics as well. You see a lot of the hurdle hops and kind of pogo-like patterns that have a little bit more similarity and transfer to top end speed in the mechanics of top speed sprinting that really aren't the most appropriate or the best choices for skating. So, I think that that's kind of the big message. And the other way to look at it is that even that initial acceleration phase of sprinting from a standstill, even that is really over speed training compared to skating. The limb turnover is faster. The ground contact times are shorter. It's still further. It's still it's an overspeed pattern compared to skating.
Yeah. Okay. I guess, we have to do what we can do in the gym, right?
Yeah. And, I think that that's one of the big things I try to convey in the book is that there's a continuum of sprinting options and plyometric options. And it's not to say that if you choose something that transfers more directly to top end speed sprinting, that it's not going to have any positive impact on skating at all. It's just to say that there's probably more appropriate options that replicate the body positions and the ground contact times and the pushing type patterns and the more lateral and single leg nature of skating. And there's if you really want to maximize the transfer of your off-ice training into on-ice skating speed, then it's beneficial to choose the exercises that have the best transfer.
Absolutely. Kev, you have a little section called True Speed Training, and this is a lot of controversy. I actually just read the book by Pavel, The Quick and the Dead, and they talk about we're not getting enough rest. We're really not getting enough rest, and they overemphasize, in the two exercises that you do, like you have to follow. Do not modify the rest periods here. Just do the rest periods, right? And you're talking about that too. I mean, I know most on ice, you said most on ice sprints occur relatively short distances, but in practice, they're not really getting the true rest that they need to really maximize that. You think we'll ever get to a point where that on ice work is going to be beneficial to true speed training?
I think it really depends on the context of what the goal of a session is. I think in a team practice, there's a lot of other outcomes that the coaching staff are hoping to deliver from that session. So it's not just everybody's out there to improve their top end speed. With that said, there are a lot of scenarios that players will stay out for extra work or individual work where that might be a goal. And, I think within that context, if the coaches are open-minded and also believe that players, one of their major limiting factors is their speed and are willing to spend some time on the ice really addressing it, then yeah, for sure. I think it's possible that there will be more focus placed on that. The game only continues to get faster and faster as the rules continue to limit some of the open ice contact and the clutching and grabbing and, sticks now if they lift up off the ice. It seems like every time there's a whistle. So, the players are faster and the game is faster than ever. And with that, I think that there's going to be an increased awareness from coaches at all levels that speed can be a major limiting factor for players. And if they take that seriously, that they're going to have to take specific steps and measures to improve the speed of their players. And, there's different ways to monitor rest intervals. And I can tell you from being on the ice that when you have somebody go through a drill and you're the coach and they finish that drill, if you let them rest for 10 seconds, it feels like an eternity out there. And I think that that's part of the problem is that if you're just kind of, looking at if you're just looking at the player and using an internal clock to say, okay, I think this player's ready, then, 30 seconds feels like 2 hours when you're just standing there doing nothing. And as the coach, you're not tired because you didn't just skate. So, we in San Jose and in Boston, we've had heart rate monitors to provide live feedback about where the player's at that way. So that's kind of a starting point to make sure that heart rate recovers to a certain point. I think when you're looking at true max speed, that the heart rate recovery is really the earliest sign that the player is approaching a state that they might be ready to repeat that effort. The nervous system and muscular system take a little bit longer. So, I think that heart rate recovers, and then you just try to buy as much time as the situation will allow, whether that's another 10 seconds or another 30 seconds, depending on, how many players are out there and what you're trying to manage. But I think it's really helpful to have some other marker to guide the rest other than just the coach's internal clock or the player's internal clock. Because sometimes they're thinking like, all right, I only have 2 more. If I start now, I can just get out of here.
Okay. Yeah, true. Kev, what I like to, what you did in here was talk about, it reminded me of TPI, where you talked about some of the physical limitations that can cause stride faults. And I think it's important for coaches to really understand, the movement demands of hockey, and that, skating obviously is what we're talking about. Speed, we're talking about skating. Let's talk a little bit about some of the faults, if we want to call them that, and maybe some of the physical limitations that can cause them. So you're talking about insufficient skating depth. Talk about some of the physical limitations there.
Sure. So, I've spent a lot of time over the course of my career up to this point running through different movement assessments. And my interest in that really stemmed from this assumption within the sport of hockey that hip injuries were just a natural part of the sport and that they were inevitable and the risk of those couldn't be mitigated in any way. And, I think my thought process on some of the movement screening has evolved a little bit from it just being an injury screen or injury risk predictor to looking at how it may impact performance. And there's research to support this, but the research is really unnecessary because anybody that's been around hockey knows that the fastest skaters adopt a lower skating depth. Essentially the more you drop your hips, the longer your stride is because you're in a deeper knee flexion angle, which gives you a longer push off. You increase stride length. That's more contact time with the ice. It gives you an opportunity to put more force into the ice, which propels your body forward faster. So things that may limit skating depth, obviously the big one within hockey is hip flexion, which can come from femoral acetabular impingement. It can come from more functional limitations that are modifiable, meaning, if somebody just kind of defaults to a position of excessive anterior pelvic tilt, then they're going to have early closure of hip flexion and not be able to get down as low. A lack of ankle dorsiflexion is another big one. That can be a physical limitation from the player's ankles. It can be the way that they lace their skates. If they're tied too tight, too high, even if they have dorsiflexion, they may not be able to express it and get into that position. And then the one that may be a little bit less intuitive is hip abduction. And external rotation for that matter. But if you get into a really deep hip flexion position, and then you go to extend your leg out as far as you can to the side, if you don't have that abduction range of motion, then you have to stand up taller to be able to extend your knee fully. So that's another one where if somebody has great range of motion in the sagittal plane, but not optimal abduction, then they may still adopt a higher skating position. And contrast, if they have great frontal plane range of motion and maybe not great sagittal plane range of motion, then they'll still adopt a higher skating position. So, that's where I think a really basic, kind of looping back to the TPI reference, I think a really basic screen can help sift out if there's any major barriers that are going to prevent players from getting into these positions that are going to be optimal to express skating speed. And if they do have a limitation, is it something structural that you're just going to have to pattern around and keep in mind for the way they're performing different exercises in the weight room as well? Or is it something that is modifiable and, then you can use whatever tools and strategies you have access to help remove that barrier for the player?
Yeah, Kev, go back to ankle mobility. It seems like almost all hockey players would probably have a problem with that just from the nature of the skate, right? And it seems like a relatively new thing with the thinking about, the laces. Wait a minute, don't tape, because everybody used to tape their ankles up. And what have you seen from that perspective from ankle mobility? Do a lot of the players have limited dorsiflexion, or are they pretty okay with it?
When I first started assessing that at Endeavor, it was it was pretty eye opening. I would say the typical player ranged from limited to horrifically limited. If you kind of do the typical half kneeling dorsiflexion test using the FMS kit, we had players that had negative dorsiflexion, meaning, if you kind of set their toe up at the 2-inch mark, some people were struggling to hit 0. So they had a negative 2-inch deficit using that assessment. So, I think since that time, and I'm probably not the best person to ask because we put such a priority on developing ankle dorsiflexion and plantar flexion for that matter, but especially ankle dorsiflexion range of motion, that it really has, in the environments that I've worked in, it's been okay. I think there's still a couple red flags, but in general, as a group, the players have been in a good spot. I think that there's some structural limitations in the ankle, just like there can be in the hips, that limit some players. But this is similar in San Jose and in Boston. We do some sort of ankle mobility work every day. And in Boston, our players will go through a warm-up that we design before every practice day and every game day. So we have, if you kind of think of that on a weekly scale, players get 1 day off per week based on the CBA. So that's 6 days a week that players are doing ankle mobility work of some sort. And, you kind of transfer that out over the course of the season. And we're talking about hundreds of sets over the course of the season to help minimize losing that as a result of spending all season in a skate boot. And then we screen for it too. So if a player has a significant limitation that is going to warrant extra work outside of just what's being done and kind of a typical warm-up, then we'll prescribe some individual work to help the players accumulate more time in dorsiflex position to get some of the soft tissue changes and attack it aggressively, because I think it is really important for getting into good skating positions, and then also, just kind of loading through that ankle and developing the power at push off as well.
Very cool. Kev, let's move in. Let's finish up with last year you were on the show. It was episode 234. It was last summer, right before you did the Optimizing Adaptation and Performance workshop with James Laval and Mike Potenza. And so we did go a little bit more in depth in that. But now you're releasing the videos and the whole thing as an online course so people can have access to that. And I had James on the show and I was trying to get him on since last year. He's a hard guy to get in touch with, but when he did, he was like all in. It was awesome. It was a great interview. Love everything he does. So tell us a little bit about what this product is, Optimizing Adaptation and Performance, when it gets released, et cetera.
Sure. So it's essentially just the bird's eye view of the product. There are 7 presentations. There are 3 from James, 2 from me, and 2 from Mike. And we set up a membership site so that, you kind of pay for access and you can access the videos from anywhere you have a Wi-Fi connection for the rest of your life. There's also a PDF download for all of the presentations as well. So you can kind of take that with you and review that as needed. I think the idea with the seminar, you had James on the show. For the people that didn't have an opportunity to listen to that, James is, a pharmacist. He's a dietitian. I think I feel very comfortable saying that he's one of the world's leading experts in metabolism and applied nutrition and supplementation and using blood work to drive some of these interventions to improve health and to improve performance. I think he's really special in that he's an academic in a lot of senses, in that he is on top of the research. He really has a unbelievable understanding of the foundational physiology and cellular metabolism and biology that influences a lot of the outcomes of his interventions, but he's also realistic, and he works in the real world with real athletes and can kind of meet people where they are with his recommendations. And because of that, when you listen to him speak, you get a really good sense of what the underlying science is, what the functional outcomes are of maybe a limitation or overtraining or sleep deprivation, or a couple of the things that he talked about that weekend. And then also, what are some low-hanging fruit strategies to try to improve that? So it's really a neat opportunity to learn from somebody that a lot of people, at least for me, I hadn't heard of until Mike introduced him to me several years back. And the way that he looks at things has had a profound impact on my life, on the recommendations to our athletes. And, I think just getting his message out to more people was important to Mike and I. And then for Mike and I, Mike gave a presentation on the reconditioning process, and then also on in-season training. And, I think his perspective now I believe this is his 14th, might be his 15th year as the head in San Jose. He's worked in collegiate settings, he's worked in the private sector. So, being able to lean on that expertise to say what works in an in-season in-season training program. Obviously the schedule that he and I are dealing with, it presents some unique challenges, but how he's managing in-season program design, how he's using testing to monitor the effectiveness of this program, I think is really unique and special, and provides a lot of ideas that people in any environment can take and mold and implement in their own settings. And similarly with the reconditioning side of things, I think a lot of the people that have an opportunity to work alongside rehab professionals can probably appreciate that there's still a lot of situations where a player's coming back from an injury and the training professional doesn't see him at all. And then the surgeon or the doctor or the athletic trainer, whoever it is, says like, okay, they're good, they can come back now. And in the meantime, that player, that athlete may have a completely detrained system because they were told that they shouldn't do anything for however long, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks sometimes. And then they get cleared because an injury is quote unquote healed, but the rest of their body is so detrained that they're really not even remotely prepared to transition back to sport. So Mike's presentation really talks a lot about how to continue to maximize the player's physical development and preparedness throughout the course of an injury recovery process, and how to use different benchmarks along the way to say, okay, this player is really ready to progress on to the next stage from a training standpoint, not just from a, is the injury healed standpoint. So that's a little bit of a case study presentation too. And, I personally always learn better when you can see some real world application and see it live, and, kind of you understand where the thought process is coming from. So then you can start to mold that with some of your own ideas and some of your own situations. And, I watch him give that presentation, and my mind's thinking of other athletes and where they are at different stages and some other things that I could have added or done differently, et cetera. So that part of it was really interesting to me. And then, I kind of gave 2 talks in different areas. One was on workload monitoring and communication, and also tied in different recovery modalities. I think that's an important one, because people just say like, all right, do your recovery work, but there's not a lot of, all of the different recovery strategies kind of get lumped under the recovery umbrella. And there's not a lot of thought put on what are we recovering from? And, is a recovery strategy or modality appropriate for what the stress was and what the desired adaptation is and what our schedule and timeline is. So that was one of the talks. And then the other one just kind of outlines how to use assessing and testing to create profiles of different athletes to then individualize the training program design process. And, I kind of looping back to what we talked about before with movement screening, not just being an injury risk predictor, but also a way to highlight some barriers that may prevent people from getting into optimal positions to perform. So it's more of a performance context than it is a injury prevention context. I think testing in a lot of situations is just kind of used as almost as like it's just kind of built into the process. And, we're going to test and then we're going to say, you're better or worse than you were before, which is an important thing to look at. But I don't think it's used enough as a diagnostic procedure. And, the longer you work with the same players, and the more that you see players that are really gifted in certain areas and really need some help in other areas, I think you can start to contextualize that to say, maybe this player is strong enough, and the time and energy investment into making this player stronger isn't going to impact their game to the same extent as making this player a little bit faster, or emphasizing the rate of force development and speed and power side of things. So there are some different ways to do that. I think the more athletes you have, the more challenging it is to really, truly identify what the needs are of the players. So one of the things that I've done in the past is just set up some different Excel equations and use that to kind of integrate results from different tests under the umbrella of the physical capacity that is being tested, meaning, we have all these different tests. What elements of that test are attributing or measuring something that transfers to speed? Which ones are measuring something that transfers to strength, to sprint ability, to repeat sprint ability, et cetera. And then setting up really basic visuals that will allow you to create buckets for different players within a team setting or a group setting to say, all right, these are my, you have 30 guys on a college hockey team. These are my 8 guys that would really benefit most from putting on weight and putting on more muscle mass. These are the guys that are strong enough, but really need to maximize their speed and rate of force development. These are the guys that are woefully unprepared to compete at this level and just need to get on a solid training program. And, these are the guys that are really good in the strength and speed and power areas, but the repeatability of those efforts isn't as solid. And that gives you a really clear platform to then start to make individualized adjustments for players without it turning into complete chaos and having 30 wildly different programs that are impossible to implement within the restraints of most environments.
Absolutely. And I will say what I really liked, I was there, just so everybody knows. I like the fact that this is one of those workshops that everything ties in together. And the 3 of you have worked together. That isn't always the case. A lot of times you go to a workshop and there's different, there's different lectures and whatever, and hands-on, et cetera. These are all tied together. And I will just go back to James Laval. And you hit on this. Mike had told me about James and I was kind of intimidated. I'm like, oh man, I'm not even gonna know what to ask this guy. Look at his resume. And I don't know anything about this. But once I saw him speak, I said, oh my God, he's coming on the show, because you're right. He really makes it easy to understand. Anybody that's listening to the podcast that I had James on knows that, because he really, makes the information digestible. So I'll remind everybody, it's called Optimizing Adaptation and Performance, optimizingadaptation.com. I'm going to have a link on my site, continuefit.com, so you no need to worry. But Kevin, thanks so much for coming on, talking about your experience with the Bruins so far, and in some your new book, Speed Training for Hockey, and just really some great speed training in general concepts, and then your workshop, Optimizing Adaptation and Performance. We really appreciate it.
And thanks for having me. And I'd be remiss if I didn't congratulate you too on the recent release of your book. I picked up a copy as soon as the pre-order was available, and Had an opportunity to start diving in the other day, and it's unbelievable content and material. And, I think it's really neat the way that you have it set up, where you can kind of just dive into one topic from one guy and digest that and then move on at your own pace. And the content that is in there is unbelievable. So hopefully, I'm sure everybody listening already ordered a copy, but if they have not, I hope that they will, because I think there's something in there for everybody, and you did a great job with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm hoping everybody listening right now stops what they're doing and goes and orders one. So, Kev, thanks again, buddy.
You got it. Thanks, Ed.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 267 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, strengthcoach.com, 3 days, just $1. Try it out. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day answering questions. Go to strengthcoach.com, click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. All right, special thanks to Chris Party and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, free online shipping right now, no minimum order. Check it out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Kevin Neeld for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Adam Doughty, Tim Robinson, and Train Heroic. Head over to trainheroic.com, start your free 14-day trial. Let them know I sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of the Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. Thanks to Elias Scarr for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Brett Jones and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. My name's Anthony Renna. My new book is called Be Like the Best. You can go to belikethebest.com or go to continuefit.com. The book is 50 interviews with top fitness pros. After each interview is a Be Like, which is an action step or a challenge that's going to help you be like the best. Again, you can go to belikethebest.com. All right, guys, thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.